Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Jewish Professionals Podcast, the JP Podcast. I'm Hillel Bainach.
And I'm Benjamin Winters, and we're students at Yeshiva University, just looking for some advice.
Our aim is to bring to you Jewish professionals from every industry to learn from their successes and failures, how they grew in their career and Jewish identity, and made a Kiddush Hashem along the way.
We hope you can apply what you learned through the lessons to your own life as they pass the torch to us, the next generation. We can't wait to go along this journey with you. This is the Jewish Professionals Podcast.
Woo! Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the JP Podcast, the Jewish Professionals Podcast. We're here on a beautiful day in Washington Heights, man.
It's funny you say beautiful day. I booked a golf outing. I'm not such a big golfer, but I booked a golf outing last week when it was 60 degrees. Showed up to the course, it was 20 degrees. And that one day, the recency bias of the spring coming in, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go golf. And we showed up to the course, my hands lost circulation at first hole.
That's the biggest problem with New York. You never know what you're going to get in a certain day. You know, I'm from Dallas, it's kind of the same way. It's like 100 degrees one day, and then it's like hailing the next day.
Right away.
But our guest happens, I know, to be an avid golfer as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce Chaim Zakheim, current CEO and founder of Antenna Group, and Rabbi Chaim Zakheim. We can go by that if you want. So it's an honor to come on. Thank you for coming.
Great to be here. Really great to be here. I love this guy. I like this guy.
There we go. We'll get to love.
I love his uncle.
There we go. I want to ask though, before we do get into the podcast, what was going through your head when that shot goes up?
You know what? I was just devastated about Max's injuries. So that's what I was thinking about the entire time. We went crazy. When that thing goes through the net, there was a lot of celebration.
It has to be top Jewish shot of all time.
People like Hillel, Max, others, they work so hard. People have no idea how hard these kids work to get as good as they are. And, you know, like you want to see them get rewarded for it. And it's just incredible. As a parent, as a fan, it's incredibly gratifying to see that. So, yeah, huge celebration, incredible shot. Zevi, you know, gifted players typically do their best at the biggest moments. And he did, and just thrilled.
Yeah, well, something one of the coaches told me actually is like that's what it means to be unconscious. Like you don't even think what you're doing. Like what was he thinking? It was a terrible shot. If we went down 2 in the bonus, you could draw a foul, but you know, unconscious players make unconscious plays.
Yeah, hard-earned win, great win. We're excited to see what's up ahead at the tournament. You mentioned Hillel, Chaim. You're right now CEO of Antenna Group. You didn't start there. You took a pretty unconventional path to get there. Could you sort of take us through maybe a little bit of your childhood, your upbringing, and then maybe your first career?
Yeah, so I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I grew up in a family that was committed to government service, public service. So my dad served in the Defense Department for many years. So I kind of grew up, Washington, D.C. is very different than New York. You grow up in New York, I think money is status, right? Like that's what people typically associate with status here. In Washington, D.C., status is your position, how successful you've been in that position, and access to power, like what names can you drop type of thing. Very different culture. So I grew up in that environment. So for me growing up, like, you know, never discuss money. It was never an objective. It was never a goal. It was about whatever you're going to do, just really try to be successful. So that's where I grew up. Went to the Hebrew Academy of Greater Washington, which is now called Berman.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Yeshiva University. I went to Israel for a couple of years. BMT, Olav Shalom, a great school.
Right.
I wish it had survived longer. So went to Yeshiva University, had an amazing undergraduate experience here. This place, if you take advantage of it, there's just a certain intellectual energy that you can get both for Limudei Kodesh and general studies. You can't find anywhere else. It taught me how to think. It taught me how to be analytical, how to write. Fantastic experience. And then I did go a little bit unconventional for where I ended up. So I went into the Smicha program and spent 3 years full-time here, learning and studying for Smicha. And then I actually did a year at the Grus Kollel. I got married young. So my wife and I went to the Grus Kollel my first year of marriage and learned there, and had the privilege of learning under Rosenzweig and Rav Schachter here. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Rav David Miller in Israel. And again, just really, in many ways, when I look back, taught me how to think critically, taught me to be analytical, gave me a love for both in general learning when it comes to Limudei Kodesh and Gemara and other things, but in general, just in life, real intellectual curiosity. So that was a fantastic experience. I interned for a year as a rabbi in Stamford, Connecticut, and that was also fantastic. But I figured out pretty quickly that the rabbinate was not for me. So at that point, I was kind of an inflection point. It's what am I going to do to make a living? So that's kind of how I started. And then because of the reason why I brought up how I grew up in Silver Spring, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., is I always had an interest in public policy and issue advocacy, politics. So I was fortunate enough to get what's called a Wexner Fellowship when I was in Smicha. It also paid for my master's in Jewish history. So part of that Wexner Fellowship is they pay for your graduate school, give you a very generous stipend, but you have to then serve in the Jewish community in some capacity. I thought that capacity was going to be the rabbinate. When I decided it wasn't, I had to figure something else out. So kind of talked my way into becoming the head of what's called the Jewish Community Relations Council, which is the political advocacy arm of the Jewish Federation.
Is that JCRC?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I ran the JCRC for the Central New Jersey Jewish Federation. Learned a lot, but again, after a couple of years, I realized that nonprofits, of which it's a nonprofit, aren't profitable. And I already had, I think, 2 children at the time, and a wife who's amazing, but sometimes likes to spend money. So I had to figure it out. And a big part of the job at the JCRC is lobbying public officials and public relations, really trying to carry an issue through various media platforms and messaging and crisis management and all those kinds of things. So I developed a skill set kind of without knowing it. And then figured out a way. I talked myself into a job at a smaller public relations agency to start their public affairs practice. And I realized pretty early on that I had a kind of facility for selling. And so pretty quickly, I was, I guess, accountable for, I don't know, most of their sales. And at that point, I figured out that I wanted to start my own agency. And real quick, one other piece of my background that's a little bit different is I ran for elected office, and I was a city councilman for a term in Paramus, New Jersey.
Well, really?
So all those things at the end of the day was whether it was rabbinic leadership, whether it was, I played basketball in high school, politics, what have you. It kind of gave me a grounding for leadership and also the ability to speak publicly, which is helpful when you want to start a company.
I was going to say, Ben, you kind of are following in the footsteps of all these things. From Washington, went to Berman.
BMT is the same building as Torah Traga.
Exactly.
So it looks like you'll be seeing me in the Gris Cola.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if we'll make it in. But
Mom and Dad married young. Is that on the table?
I don't know, a little appeal on the podcast. Here we know. But I wanted to ask, kind of in terms of the learning, do you really connect to it? Like, what really inspired you to want to do that for so many years?
Again, I think part of it was being intrigued by Jewish leadership. And I think the best leaders are those who are educated. I think probably one of my critiques of the Orthodox community today is that I don't know that people are particularly well read. What I mean well read is they may know Gemara, they may know Mishnah Berurah. I don't know that they know other traditional Jewish sources, whether it's Tanakh, whether it's Jewish philosophy, Jewish history, some types of higher criticism of Tanakh and that kind of stuff. And I'm just intellectually curious, and I became fascinated and passionate about Jewish texts and Jewish studies, and I still do it today. I mean, I work by day and watch my kids' basketball, and the rest of the time I'm reading. That's pretty much my life. So that's what really inspired me. And again, I thought I wanted to be a rabbi, but ultimately it just wasn't a good fit for me. So had to do something else.
Right. So you mentioned that you had that sort of career set lined up. You did Smicha program. You learned NYU. You then went to the Gris Kollel. Then you interned. You were interning for a year as a rabbi in Stamford, Connecticut. What goes through your head when you're making a total shift? Almost. I know you started with the JCRC and doing nonprofit, but you're already shifting away from what was the classic traditional pulpit rabbi role. When you're shifting that takes a lot to sort of put everything that you've been working on and put it in the backseat and say, I'm going to try something new.
Yeah. Panic, anxiety. That's pretty much I think those are my most prominent emotions in those days. But I guess when I look back, you have to find, like, life is adversity. I think Rick Pitino just gave a great speech about adversity. I have everybody look up that clip a couple weeks ago. But it is, like it's adversity, and you got to dig deep and really try to understand, like, what is it that you want to do? What can you be passionate about? Where will you be successful? And any career is going to be ups and downs. So all that adversity and all that doggedness, those are the things that you have to really draw on when you're making those decisions, whether it's an inflection point, a crossroads in career, or even when you've chosen a career. Very few people just perpetually ascend. There's always going to be ups and downs. It's just the nature of life and nature of business. So I figured it out. Look, at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that 99% of any success is luck. All of us were lucky to be born into a community that values education, with an ecosystem of people that are successful. We didn't deserve that. We didn't choose that. We got it. We were born with maybe a higher than average IQ. We were born with a work ethic. We were born with, again, a great network. So there's so much luck. And when you look back, if I hadn't met this person at that time, I wouldn't have gotten that first client, which enabled me to build. So there's so much of that. So I think all of us need to constantly keep that in mind. It's good for humility. And it's also ultimately good for business, to realize that you can only do so much. You try to control what you can control. But ultimately, it's by the grace of God that, you get some of these things to happen.
But I mean, a part of that also is you have to be ready when that opportunity comes. Like, you meet that potential client, you have to be ready to pitch him.
Yeah. I mean, again, you got to, in my business, I think in most businesses, when you're in sales, people always ask me, can you teach me? How did you sell? How did you build a business? What's the secret sauce? The hardest thing in sales is to make the ask, period. Most people are not comfortable making an ask because they're afraid of rejection. I mean, I dated for a while. Nobody's better at rejection than this guy. So it's easy for me. What's the worst that can happen? Someone says no. You ask somebody for a favor, they can say no. As long as you're the type of person that if somebody asks you a favor, you're going to do it, you have every right in the world to ask somebody else for a favor. And when you go into a meeting and you want to get a job or you want to get a client and they say, I can't really help you, have another ask. Can you introduce me to 3 more people? Build a network. So the hardest thing in business is to make that ask and face the specter of rejection. Do it.
Right, swallowing that pride.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, struggling with it myself. Even nowadays, like, sometimes you go and you interact with people and you're like, have a request for the person. You just have to be able to just get over that. A quick story. One time with Hilla, we were actually in Poland on a trip. And I think it was, we got lost from the group, or we lost Hilla from the group, and he came back, I think, with 5 guys like around him, like who he had made for his friends already, just for a 3-second conversation.
So it was all worth it.
I don't think he knew any of their names. But somehow he was walking back with them from the group. We were just not in shock at all.
The Polish people are unique. I mean, you got to meet the diversity in the world.
Exactly. Could you sort of tell us a little bit about what you do now at Antenna Group and what value you provide for your clients?
But can I ask, actually, before we get into that, I wanted to talk a little about the councilman, because I know we're going to spend most of our time talking about Antenna. What happened there?
Yes, again, there was a time that I thought I wanted to be an elected official. I think I moved to Paramus, New Jersey, actually, specifically because it was in a Republican district, and I wanted to run for state office eventually. So actually, I ran for in the primary for state assembly, and I lost. Again, a great experience because I had to go knocking on doors of people from very different backgrounds and ethnicities and religion and ask them for their vote and sit down on their kitchen table and talk to them about issues. And I was 23 or 24. So incredible experience. Again, you talk about rejection. Losing an election is painful, but you learn from it. And then I decided the local parties that want you run for city council. Paramus is interesting because it's only 30,000 people, but it's the number 1 retail shopping district in the country. So it's got the issues of a big city in terms of traffic and policing and that kind of stuff.
Big malls over there?
Yeah, Garden State Plaza and a few others. So it was an interesting place to work. And then working with the police departments and even sanitation. I mean, local government ultimately impacts our lives more than any other level of government.
That's interesting.
Interesting.
Right. Probably also gets the least amount of attention from people. Everyone's always thinking.
Absolutely does. It's the same people that actually come to every meeting and annoy the heck out of you.
So the town halls, you see that in the movies, like screaming at you, cursing you out.
But ultimately, again, it just wasn't. It wasn't a great fit for me at the time. I became a little bit disillusioned with politics over time. I ideologically I've changed a little bit, but it was an amazing experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Right. Just learning, I guess, to sit down with people, talk with them, face that, I guess, that rejection. That's ambitious as a 24-year-old running.
Yeah, it's a rejection, but it's also, we live in a bubble. We live in a socioeconomic bubble.
Mm-hmm.
We live in a religious bubble to really understand how hard it is for people to make a living every day. You meet somebody who can barely pay their mortgage, who, comes to traffic court and can't pay that $50 ticket and calls you on the side and say, hey, can you intervene for me? Like, those are powerful experiences, and it sensitizes you, A, to how lucky you are, and B, to what the real world is. So it was an incredible experience on multiple levels.
Right.
Right. And yeah, it allows you to appreciate what you have,
Absolutely.
And so now kind of going into Antenna.
Yeah. So anyway, I worked at that public affairs shop and left and started my own agency. And from the beginning, I made the decision, and that's the last time I'm going to use a personal pronoun when it comes to my company, because we always use plural pronouns.
Mm-hmm.
It's really not about me. But when I did decide to start the company, we wanted to focus in niche industry verticals, right? So the issue with public relations is anybody can hang up a sign on their house or anywhere and say they're a public relations agency. It's not a high barrier to entry. So the question is, how do you differentiate yourself?
Could you clarify what is a public relations?
Sure. Yeah. So public
Agency?
relations and marketing is it's a professional service in which we can help companies, individuals, sports teams, anybody deliver their message to their key audiences. And we do so on various platforms. Those platforms could be newspaper. Those platforms could be television. Increasingly over the years, it's been web and social media. Having that company, understanding exactly who they want to talk to, right? So that's on that side. Figuring out what that message is to key audiences, and then finding the right platform to connect client to audience. That's what we do when you really break it down. There's a lot of different services we do to, in that service, but ultimately that's what we do.
Right. The liaison, I guess, between.
Yeah, I mean, it's a liaison, but it's ultimately a company can't sell until people know who they are. A politician can't get elected until people know who they are and what they stand for and what the value proposition is and what the differentiation is. So whether it's a social media post to do it, whether it's building a website, whether it's SEO, whether it's, again, getting somebody in a newspaper, speaking at a conference, there's a lot of different ways we can elevate that platform and build that brand. But that's what they hire us to do.
Right. Nowadays, also, I feel like branding is everything when it comes to.
It always has been.
When it comes to.
It always has been.
But now I feel like you're also seeing it everywhere. Maybe
because social media is
right. Exactly.
So if you think about it, you've always seen it.
Mm-hmm.
It's billboards, television, radio, newspapers back in the day. But yes, it's a lot more ubiquitous now because you can't escape it on your phone.
Right.
So that's definitely true. But anyways, so we decided we wanted to focus in niche industry verticals, right? Because that's how we would differentiate. And the three criteria for it, what I wanted them to be interesting, consequential, and mission driven. So every job can be hard, it can be a grind, but if you can go home at night and feel like you advanced the ball on an issue of import, that's great. So we did that. And today we work in 4 primary industry verticals. We work in climate technology, or what they call energy transition, and that's all things around clean energy. We work in the mobility sector. So it's working for car companies and that whole ecosystem, but mainly around electrification of the fleet and electric vehicles. We work in real estate and property technology, and we also work in health. So those are our 4 practice areas.
Why did you choose those specifically?
Again, because to me, they're interesting and mission driven. If you can differentiate, also when we started with a number of these industries, they were early stage. And we were fortunate enough, again, you talk about luck, we were fortunate enough to have them grow into much bigger industries. And today we're 150 people and I guess 4 states in this country, 2 countries overseas. So we've been really fortunate to grow and lucky. And I've only done it because I've been beyond fortunate to surround myself with incredible people who are, number one, kind and empathetic. That's a huge value in our company, but also super smart and driven. So
something I always wondered about is, what is day one of starting a company like? You see in I don't know if you watch The Office, where Michael Scott starts Michael Scott Paper Company, and it's like in his house taking paper. What was that like for you?
The paper company is a great episode.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm a big fan of the fire alarm episode. That's my favorite.
There's so many. It's amazing. I think I've watched through The Office, probably 5 times over the years. That's a great question, Hillel. and I have to think back. I'll just say like when you start a company, right? Number one, you just have to have like kind of a vision of where you want to go, right? And what's your objective? And for me, it's never been, we I'm going to get back to the question, but we talk about growth in my company. There's vertical growth and horizontal growth. And vertical growth, I think, is what most people associate with growth. It's more revenues, more profits, more people, what have you. And that's fine. That's one grade on the report card. For me, that's not interesting. And that's not actually, by focusing on that, I've never grown. For us, it's horizontal growth. It's what's the next challenge. That challenge could be an acquisition. That challenge could be starting a new industry practice. That challenge could be a new SaaS solution for your firm. That challenge could be innovating a new technology for the marketplace. There's so many horizontal challenges. And if you do horizontal challenges well, and they're hard, that's the hardest thing, and it's friction and it's difficult. But if you do those well, the vertical growth always comes by itself. So when you asked me the first day, my first day was horizontal growth issue. How am I getting that first client in climate tech, and how am I getting that first employee? That was really it. And I had an advantage. I started with a few companies that I knew would want to join me. But ultimately, that was it. I knew I wanted to build an agency. I wanted to work on interesting issues. And right away, it's all right. How do I get that first client? How do I get that first employee? And you build from there.
Was there a point where you felt the momentum picking through and that Antenna Group was really starting to scale and the team was going to build and more clients were going to come, or just slowly over time? You mentioned that just by horizontal growth, it kind of just happened.
Yeah. So again, there's this incremental growth, and I probably had incremental growth for about 3-4 years. And then 2008 happened, which was pretty much the worst economic environment since the Great Depression. So that set us back a little bit. But we had incremental growth. We've also grown through acquisitions. We've done 4 or 5 acquisitions over the years. But
is that a lot or is that standard?
For a small business, it's a lot in my industry. And what happened for us was, as I mentioned before, the industries that we're in, climate tech, mobility, property technology, they all sort of hit inflection point around the same time, hit their tipping point. So if we were having this podcast before the pandemic, we were maybe 60 people. And then within 18 months, because of the macroeconomic, tailwinds at the time, but also because the industries we're in, they just grew so much, we got to 170 people in 18 months. So when you're a 60-person agency and you grow by 110 people, so you have to hire now 110 people in 18 months, you don't have the infrastructure for it. It was a huge challenge, super exciting, but a huge challenge. And so that's been the growth story.
And you mentioned surrounding yourself with impressive and hardworking people. So for college students listening to this, what are the qualities that you really look for?
Yeah. So I want people who are willing to fail, who are willing to stretch. I'll hire people whose background is public relations and marketing, but I don't love that as a background in school. Have some working knowledge, do an internship, but ultimately I want people like, if you're a philosophy major, an English lit major, really any other major, it shows to me that if you want to go into PR, you're intellectually curious, you're not afraid of a challenge. And ultimately, to me, success is somebody who's willing to step out of their comfort zone, someone who's willing to challenge themselves, not afraid of failure. So I look for that. That's a big part of it. And then when you start to scale an agency, the number one difficulty is, how do you create cohesion? How do you get everybody, rowing in the same direction? It's hard. Human beings are complicated. How do you build that culture? And what I've come to over the years is you really need to be discerning about people, whether or not, are they kind and are they empathetic? If people can be that with each other, ultimately that's going to build trust. And when you have trust in an organization between people, because it has to be trust, you're relying on the person next to you to help you finish a deliverable for a client, right? I'm relying on an executive in Czech Republic right now to run an office. Like, there has to be trust. But when you can build that trust and people feel it, that unlocks all the amazing things about work. Just does. So again, for me, stretching, people who are willing to gamble, people who raise their hands, want to take the initiative, and then kind of on a personal level, are they kind and empathetic? And if you have that, surround your people, and then you cast them appropriately. You got to put them in the right position, the right job. It takes care of itself.
Could you tell everyone what it's like managing a company that's now grown to 170 employees and with projects spanning, you mentioned Czech Republic, also London, Washington, D.C., New York. Is the phone always on? How do you have time to take off? What's that sort of experience like?
You know, everybody knows that I shut down between November and March for basketball. So no one can find me. I'm traveling and yeah, the phone makes it difficult. And people always ask me about work-life balance. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a question I get, especially from younger people for some reason.
It's big in
I'm
today's.
like, work-life balance when you're 25. There is no work-life balance. But anyway, that's a different story. But to me, work-life balance doesn't mean that I'm going to work from 9 to 5 and I go home, right? I have set responsibilities. I have to own a business. I have to be a parent. I have to be a religious Jew, and figure out, and I have to sleep. So figure out in those 18 hours a day that you're awake, or 17 hours, how are you going to do it? How are you going to split it up? But it could be that I'm a great parent from 8 to 9 in the morning. I work from 9 to 2 in the afternoon. I take a break to go do daf yomi. And then, that's what work-life balance is. To me, it's not 9 to 5 and I'm out. I mean, you can be that. I don't know that you can be that successful.
So when you were younger and you were kind of planning out, raising your kids, raising your family, spending time with your wife, obviously, obviously planning is kind of what you're talking about. Is there anything else you did to maximize your time?
I tried my best. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to be really good at everything. Something's always going to give. I mean, our first acquisition, which really propelled a lot of growth for us, was we acquired a firm that specialized in clean tech or clean energy in San Francisco. And it was a turnaround job. I mean, I was, you can ask Max, I was in San Francisco every 3 weeks from Monday to a Thursday, and I missed a lot. I missed a lot of stuff. And it's hard. You're never sure if you made the right decision, but ultimately, you do your best to balance and be thoughtful about it. And when you are around, be present. That's also huge. If you're going to be home and you're thinking about work the entire time, what's the point, right? So try to be present with your family and be present in whatever your religious commitment is, and be present when you're at your kids' sports games. That's not hard for me, actually.
Yeah. You're a little too present.
Exactly. I am way too present. But yeah.
Could you tell us maybe some of the one or two cool projects, or if you could highlight one or two? I'm sure you've worked on a bunch, but your favorite sort of client engagements and some of the cool things that you guys done.
Like a story too.
Yeah. So we worked for many years for the Kingdom of Morocco. Again, because of my public affairs bent, we were fortunate enough to handle the communications around all their bilateral issues with the United States and the United Nations. So it was a fascinating account. They had some border conflicts, but in general, before it was popular, it was a moderate Muslim country.
Well, how did they find you guys?
That was networking. I met somebody and just begged and begged and begged. Got a small engagement, which we were able to grow over the years, and tremendous people. But, it was a moderate Muslim country. As a Jew, it was fascinating. Again, this was before everybody became moderate. This goes back a while. And, we had to do work around messaging Israel stuff and U.S. stuff and national security things and giving advice to an ambassador. And I used to go to Morocco and give advice to, other senior government officials. And so that was an incredible experience. I love that. I'm not going to point to a specific company. We've done work. We do work for Amazon and Google and BlackRock and Blackstone, United Airlines, and some really cool companies and some amazing startups that, that when we started working with them, they were venture-backed companies and now are big public companies. And those are all exciting. But again, it kind of gets back to the horizontal growth. What I love is, the work we do today for clients are really complex remits. They'll hire us. We need some public relations help with a media crisis. We also need a website. We need you guys to do some really innovative and creative design work. We want you to do SEO. And so you have these integrated campaigns that are difficult. And you've got to build the infrastructure around it. You have to do great work. Professional service, you're only as good as what you did today. You get no credit tomorrow. You got to keep going. So the more complex our work gets, the better it gets, the more, we've won some awards for it. That to me is incredibly gratifying and interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's super interesting working with, real princes and kings.
They make you put on the white. That's only for...
So you mentioned golf. I'll tell you a quick story. So I was in Morocco, and I do like to golf. I'm horrendous, but I do like to golf. Talk about humility. That gives you humility.
Yeah.
So the way in a lot of these countries where there's a king, which Morocco has, everything is, royal this, royal that. So they have their royal golf course. And the person who, my client said, let's go play golf. I know you love golf. So we go to this course and, I don't have clubs. So they give me clubs, fine.
Royal clubs.
Royal clubs. Royal clubs, yeah. Solid gold. No, but yeah. And I said, I don't have any golf balls. So they give me a few golf balls. I mean, literally, these are golf balls that aren't even fit for a range. I mean, just dirty and horrible. But I have a caddy, of course, because it's the Royal course. And so we go to tee off. So I tee off with a ball, and I'm sure I, shanked it somewhere. Or who knows where the ball went. It's fine. This caddy was like just running into the woods. Somehow we'd get the ball and like smile. It was amazing. But the issue was that we get out there and the caddy has one tee. So of course, on that first hole, I break the tee in half. But that's okay because the entire round, I'm playing with the incredibly shrinking tee. And he would take it, take some knife and go put it in the ground, and got through 18 holes with a tee, which by the end was like subterranean. I mean, you couldn't see it anymore.
You're hitting the driver literally off the...
Correct. So
off the mat.
So at least I had an excuse why it was bad that day.
Yeah. I mean, the Rockets are resourceful, I guess. That's something we can say.
They are, and it's like, where are the King's tees? But I guess they didn't want to share them, so...
Yeah. No golden tees. That's really funny.
And kind of talking about, you have this Jewish background, this learning background. Do you think that played a role in affecting how you viewed growing your company and viewed working with clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of my values around how to treat my colleagues, how to treat employees, how to treat clients. I talked about before about kindness and empathy, making sure that, you're there for an employee. If they have an issue outside of work and they are comfortable to talk about it, you make sure you're there to help them. That's very much driven by my Jewish values. I think that I mentioned before, a lot of my intellectual curiosity and my love of books and learning, I think very much comes from my experience in yeshiva. And I think that ultimately, when I look at, I have a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks. I made a lot more mistakes than I have, the right decisions over the years. But one of the things I think is a strength I bring is I'm always thinking and challenging and reading and learning. And I'm a life learner, and that enables you as a CEO to continue to try to teach people and push people. So I got that, I think, from my Jewish background. And ultimately, I mentioned before, and I call it the Starbucks test. When I used to go to Starbucks, I only went to Starbucks because my oldest son, JJ, would bring me there. I didn't want to pay for that coffee, but JJ did, so I would go.
Big time frap, the grande.
Exactly. So I'd go there, and I really tried to have the mindset of it's really because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I'm on this side ordering and not that side being the barista, right? And that to me is a real Jewish value of, whether you call it luck or serendipity or, grace of God, what have you. Ultimately, I think it's really important to keep that in mind. And I think sometimes having that humility helps you in business, helps you learn, it helps you deal with mistakes and adversity. And that to me is definitely something that I learned over the years in yeshiva, at YU, at home, elsewhere.
Being in so many different countries, as you mentioned, Antenna Group, and bringing your Yiddishkeit to the table, have there been any sort of close calls or times where there were so much stuff needed to get done, or a holiday was coming up, Shabbos, anything that sort of you were in a little bit of a sticky situation, you had to pass it off to someone else, or any other engagements where there was a little bit of a clash?
I feel like this is a gotcha question. I thought this was a friendly podcast. I want to make sure, does God download episodes? Be careful what I say.
Everyone listens. You never know.
Everybody listens. The answer is all the time.
Right.
All the time. And, everybody's got to make their decisions in terms of what they need to do. And everybody, one of the things people say is, can't compromise. Everybody compromises in some ways, different ways. And to me, for sure, at times I've had to, I just had to either ignore things or let things go, or in certain situations, miss a Purim or miss nights of Hanukkah. It's tough. But I've had a couple of really close calls with flights. Mm-hmm. In fact, this year I was coming back, I forget, I don't know, maybe from, was it Denmark? I don't know. I had some business meeting and I had to fly through Zurich. And I hate traveling on Fridays, but it was the only way I could do it. And typically when you fly from Europe this direction, you get in 10, 11 o'clock, even with a stopover. Anyway, Get to Zurich on time, get on the flight, ready to go on time, and 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, I'm panicking. Flight gets canceled.
Oh no!
So I have
Chabad Zurich.
figure out a hotel right away. Like, I couldn't even get to Chabad Zurich. Like my Shabbos meals were like Hershey bars and potato chips. But it happens. You do the best you can.
And kind of talking about, you meet with all these people, and you talked about the importance of making a network. What advice would you give to college students trying to build their own network?
I'd send them to Hillel.
King Network, the royal networker.
And it's funny. My kids always roll their eyes and laugh at me when I'm always telling them to build networks. Although I think that the older ones have started to see the value in it. The number one thing about building a network is you have to be prepared and willing to help other people. Because once you do that, then you have every right to expect others to help you, right? So you speak to somebody, you ask them a question. Hey, how can I help you as well? So it's the most important thing in business, that network. There's nothing more important. Use LinkedIn. It doesn't matter if it's somebody that you never think in a million years would be of help or be of need. You never know. Sales cycles and job cycles can be years in the making, right? But it's those connections that you make over time that in situations you never expect all of a sudden crop up and boom, it helped. It also makes life interesting, right? Diverse people you normally wouldn't meet to have in a network. And then the other thing is plenty of people will build networks, but they don't use their networks. They don't keep themselves top of mind with their networks. So it's like, and then try to bring value to your networks on social media. If you find a great article, like push it out to your network. That's bringing value. It's keeping you top of mind with people. So build it and use it and leverage it, and always be willing to help out people in your network. They'll reciprocate.
Right. You mentioned also
hire Hillel as a consultant.
There we go. The royal networker. I think that's going to be our new title for Hillel. You mentioned sort of the need to always be learning, and that's something you look for. You're always reading. Could you give us maybe a book or two that is a must read when it comes to just becoming a better version of yourself, or just making your business acumen better?
Yeah. So there was a Israeli Nobel Prize winner for economics, Daniel Kahneman, and he wrote a book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow.
Mm-hmm.
That changed how I look at people, how I interact with people, how I negotiate. It's all about how our brains essentially trick us. You mentioned before, actually, recency bias. That's a Daniel Kahneman concept.
Mm-hmm.
So it's called a heuristic. It's biases that we have that we're totally not aware of, that motivate decision making for everybody. It's kind of like it goes back to like evolutionary reasons and that we select for certain ways our brains work. But anyway, must read. It's not an easy read, but it's a must read. That changed my approach. Let's see what's another. I mean, I love biographies. The biography of Harry Truman, I think it's by David McCullough. Actually, a better one. If you really want to understand how the world works and the nature of power, the book it's called The Power Broker. It's about somebody by the name of Robert Moses, who essentially built New York City.
Mm-hmm.
It's written by maybe the best biographer in the history of this country, Robert Caro. He also wrote a great book about Lyndon Johnson. So that's another one.
Is Walter Isaacson coming for his title? He came out with the Steve Jobs, Elon Musk.
The question is, when's the Chaim Zakheim biography coming out?
Yeah, it'll be about 1.5 pages, maybe. So I don't think it'd be a very interesting read. But yeah, I could. Do you do podcast notes afterwards?
Yeah,
for the show?
yeah.
I'll give it more thought.
Okay,
a few books.
Perfect.
Great.
And Ben, I think I'm going to take the question today. Ben loves asking this one, but what is one thing from your industry, kind of the PR world, that you think can apply to all other industries and a lesson we can take away?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Every great movement in the history of the world, right? Whether it's Judaism, whether it's Christianity, whether it's civil rights, whether it's anything progressive, social justice, anything that's moved the world forward in a progressive, positive way, it's been created And the impetus for it and the way it's ultimately been distributed is through storytelling. Right? Moshe, great storyteller. The Chumash, great story. I know this is a Yeshiva University podcast, but Jesus and his disciples, amazing storytellers. Martin Luther King, amazing storyteller. Gandhi. I mean, I can go on and on and on, right? It's because human beings ultimately are motivated and moved by narrative, not by facts and figures. So that's my industry. I always tell our employees that, we work very hard on climate. We're passionate about the need to reverse climate change and mitigate carbon emissions. And, scientists are working on technology innovations for it, and politicians are working on regulations, and maybe some politicians are working against regulations. I won't get to politics right now. But ultimately, our role as storytellers, to me, is as important as anybody. So when you think about PR and marketing, it's telling stories for companies, telling stories on behalf of issues. And that, to me, is something that is relevant to everybody.
That's awesome. And maybe any last takeaways as a Jewish professional in the workplace that a message you want to leave our audience with?
I can guarantee you this, and it's especially true nowadays. Whether they say it or not, everybody knows you're a Jew. Everybody's judging you for being a Jew, both positively and negatively. And it's not just enough to articulate Jewish values. You have to live them. You have to model that behavior because people are always judging. And if you want to be Makadosh Shem Shemayim, it's an everyday, every second challenge. The second you slip, people are judging. And the second you elevate and the second you reflect well on Jewish values, people are judging as well.
Okay. Thanks so much.
I'm Zakheim, everybody.
If you want more, he also is the host of a podcast. Go Max.
Tune in this Friday. I don't know when this will be released.
When I say Go Max, it's Go Max Zakheim. Go Maccabee.
It's an XC, I guess. Exactly. XCS. Okay. Thanks so much for tuning in. Like and subscribe. This is the Jewish Professionals Podcast. We'll catch you on the next one.